Good afternoon, dear friends. Today will be a very interesting issue, so be sure to watch to the end. Now, not only in Kursk region, but also in Zaporizhzhia region, the army has gone on the offensive. Ukrainian publics are already sounding the alarm, saying that there is a possible risk of the first line of defense breaking through. Some sources say that the first line has already been breached. All in all, we'll be looking into what's going on. There is also a call between Trump and Putin tonight. A lot of news is expected, and it will become clear what will ultimately happen with this 30-day ceasefire. What do you think about it? Will it take place or not? Write in the comments. Well, we continue to study the situation on the front. Let's open the map. So, traditionally, let's start with the situation in Kursk and Sumy regions. What is happening in Kursk region? As I said in yesterday's issue, the order came from Kiev to hold those pieces of territory that are still under the control of the armed forces of Ukraine. Of course, we are not talking about a small area near the village of Oleshny. The AFU is unlikely to be able to hold it at any rate, as the offensive on the village is now coming from several sides. From the south, they have already managed to get a grip on the outskirts, and there is also pressure from the north. The enemy's positions are shrinking, despite the fact that the village is adjacent to the border, and the AFU is trying to send reinforcements there. Nevertheless, the fate of Oleshnya is already sealed. The only question is when the village will be liberated, today, tomorrow, or the day after tomorrow. In the south, the situation is really more complicated. Holding this section, only 3 to 4 kilometers, seems pointless. It would seem, why throw new soldiers into the furnace for the sake of a couple of villages? But did common sense ever matter to Zelensky? My guess is no. I was reading the YouTube comments under my video yesterday, and the questions went like this. Asterisk, how can the AFU throw in reserves if their grouping is surrounded? Let's close that question once and for all. You see this map? Do you see any encirclement anywhere? I don't either. Earlier there was an encirclement here, but that question is closed. Someone surrendered as a prisoner. There are more than 100 of them. I showed the video. Someone managed to break through the cordon and break through to Sumy region, and someone stayed here forever. And there is no need to spread someone else's propaganda that allegedly Gerasimov let everyone out of the encirclement. This is complete nonsense. I personally showed you the footage in my channel. Very impressive footage, I'll tell you right away. So there is no encirclement now. There is only a small area in the north near Oleshny and the remainder of the AFU bridgehead in the south. That's where they are now actively bringing in reserves and trying to get them into the Gavo area. Where are the reserves coming from? In particular, from a large village to the south, from Myropolia. Why don't they strike by air? A good question that we may have an answer to in the near future. Friends, if you like this showdown, be sure to give us a like and subscribe to the channel. And we will continue to analyze the situation on the front. So, they are still striking, but nevertheless they still manage to bring in some reserves. Given that Gavo is favorably located for those who are defending it, i.e. for the AFU, the fighting for it continues. For comparison, Sudzha was liberated in 1 day, but the fighting for Gavo has been going on for 4 days already. Therefore, we can say one thing for sure, Gavo will return home. There are no options here. But, as I have already said, Kiev has set the task to hold at least some piece of Kursk land at any cost. That's why they will keep throwing in reserves, and the further battle is expected to be much more complicated and long than the battle for Sudzha. Now let's look at the situation in Sumy region. I saw the questions on YouTube. Asterisk, what are the prospects and in what direction will the army move, if at all? Now it is already obvious that the command is trying to reduce the front line here. If this succeeds, the front line will become much shorter, which will make it easier to hold it with the resources that have already been deployed. Look for yourself. Now the front line goes from here to the south. It's about 24 kilometers. But if it is shortened along this line, the length of the front line will be reduced to 14 kilometers. Thus, the front line will be reduced by 10 kilometers, which will allow to make the defense more dense and monolithic with the same resources. Although, I think that the main goal here is to reduce the front line even further, including the capture of the village of Yanukovka. That's why now there is a movement from Basov to Lakhna and from Zuravka to Belovody to then join in one line. Then this whole pocket will be cleaned up. But here it is important to realize that the main battles will begin only when the entire Kursk region will be liberated. Now let's move on to other parts of the front. Important events are also taking place there, especially in the Zaporizhia region. As I said from the beginning, even Ukrainian resources have begun to admit that the Russian army is breaking through the defense line. What are we talking about? We are talking about this section of the front west of the town of Orkova. The encirclement of this town may be the goal of the current offensive. It is reported that after the capture of Pyatakatok, the Russian army continued to move forward and managed to take control of 3 villages at once: Stepovoy, Maly Sherbaki, and just Sherbaki. It would seem that they took them. Why is there such panic in the Ukrainian publics? Even large resources such as PST had to react to this. And here's why. First, these villages are important supply hubs for the Ukrainian army in the area. Losing them seriously undermines logistics and the ability to move reinforcements. Second, advancing in this direction poses a threat of operational encirclement for the AFU grouping in Orkov. Third, this direction opens the way for a further advance westward to more fortified positions. In general, the situation is developing rapidly. The army is confidently moving forward despite fierce enemy resistance. We continue to monitor the situation on the front and keep you informed. This will require showing the features of the relief. Now all these villages, Stepovoy, Maly Sherbaki, and Sherbaki, are on an elevation. You see? The capture of these villages means that the troops managed not only to gain a foothold on the high ground, but also to gain a tactical advantage. That means a lot. Second, after the capture of Sherbakov, the Russian army will be able to move not only to bypass Orkov, as everyone says now, but also directly to the north. Here, as you see, there are fields, that is, movement is possible up to the outskirts of Moskva, and from there to Zaporizhzhia is not far away. In addition, it is through Orkov that the highway along which all the logistics of the Ukrainian army is now carried out passes. Ukrainian military experts realize this. That is why they are sounding the alarm. In general, we'll see how things turn out in the end, but the trend is already obvious. The front is beginning to revive. Earlier we practically did not touch upon Zaporizhzhia region, because the front line there remained stable for many months. But now, as you can see, the situation has begun to change. That is why a ceasefire seems unlikely. The army is moving forward, not retreating. Moving on. The movement continues in this section. There is fighting in the village of Volnoy Pol. At the moment about 40% of the village is under Russian control. There is also movement in the fields between Volnoy Poli and Shevchenko. In addition, this area behind Berlitsky was taken yesterday. The total depth of advancement amounted to 2 kilometers, and the width exceeded the mark of 4 kilometers. The front moved away from Berlitskoye itself by 2 kilometers, and Russian troops have already entered the southern outskirts of Veseloy. There is fighting there now. In general, the front is not standing still here either and is constantly moving forward. Stabilization has begun in the Pokrovsky direction. The air forces are exhausted here, so they began to lose even the small successes they had. In particular, the Ukrainian armed forces were knocked out of Kotlin. The village is under full Russian control again. As for Peskinoy, the Ukrainian armed forces hold control only over the northern outskirts. That's all. In Shevchenko, the Russian army managed to regain the southern part of the village. In the central part, fighting continues in the gray zone. In general, now the Ukrainian armed forces commanders need to think from which directions to withdraw troops to send them to Sumy region and prevent a complete collapse there. That is why such drawdowns as in Zaporizhzhia region will soon be in other parts of the front. Ukraine badly needs this 30-day truce. But whether Russia needs it is, I think, a rhetorical question. Well, that's all I have for today on the situation at the front. Well, I'll say goodbye to you for today. I wish you a good working day and see you tomorrow.